Hi, and welcome to Introduction to Fundraising and Budgets with me, Carolyn No, Director of the Institute for Health Innovation at Northern Kentucky University. I'm doing this today on behalf of the Teen Science Cafe Network in my role as a resource guide. I hope that you find this presentation useful for your programming with the Teen Science Cafes. And throughout this entire presentation, I'm going to be asking you to work with some of the documents that I've uploaded into the summary of this presentation. So please go ahead and download those documents before we get started, because you'll be filling in information about your own program throughout this entire presentation. Before you do any fundraising, the first thing you need to do is figure out what you need the money for. And to do that, you first need to develop a budget. In this slide, I'm using an example from learngrantwriting.org, because a lot of times when we build a budget, we can actually use this for grant writing later on. So if you start from a grant-oriented budget, it's going to be a lot easier to go ahead and submit that application later on. And it's still going to integrate all of the expenses that you would normally have from your program. In this, you're going to see some pretty standard items that you would incorporate into a project. So, for example, you're going to see personnel. Now, not all grants or funding is going to cover this, but it's good to have at least thought about. Your fringe benefits, which kind of go into that category of personnel, travel, equipment, supplies. Really, where you're going to find with the Teen Science Cafe, it's going to be in this maybe supplies, maybe equipment, if you buy things like a laptop or a computer to go along with your budget. But it's really going to hit in the supply section. Your food, any printing that you're doing for flyers, any hands-on activity supplies that you need. That's primarily where you're going to see most of your expenses. So on this next slide, I have come up with a very, very basic version of the Teen Science Cafe budget. Now yours is going to look so incredibly different because you're going to have different needs than I do. For us, we actually don't use venue, but I did put that in there because some organizations end up needing to book a venue. I did put food because that is one of the key ingredients to make a great Teen Science Cafe. Our materials, typically we're looking at printing of flyers. We also do some swag and door prizes, presenter gifts, those kinds of things. So I put that in there. And then any activity materials, which for us, we do a lot of health-related programming. So we might buy things like stethoscopes or gauze that our presenters use as part of their presentation. What you're going to do next is pull up the document that I have put into the summary section of this video. And in there, it's an entire fundraising plan. As you can see, the first part is the budget, which we're going to go over. Then we're going to go through some different opportunities for fundraising later on as we go through. But scrolling back up to the top, this is the very basic budget that I had on that slide previously, where we have the venue, the food, the different materials, and your total goal. What you're going to do is pause this presentation and fill in the amount that you come up with here. The next thing that you're going to do is take a look at this section here called budget justification. This is something that's going to be asked quite frequently on grant applications, which is why I've included it. You may not need it for other types of fundraising, although I think that by explaining what you're going to use the money for, you can then use that to make a case for events, for direct asks from donors to say, this is the amount that we need, and this is what we're going to do with the money that you give us. So what you're going to say is, for example, printing, we will be printing flyers that will advertise each of the cafes at the local schools or the libraries, and it will cost, $200 to do that. The budget justification doesn't necessarily get into the impact of what each individual item is. It's just going to further describe what you're going to use the money for. Later on, if you write a grant or you do some direct donor emails, you're going to want to incorporate things like impact. So by buying the flyers, we think that we'll be able to recruit more students. This entire next section, we're going to switch to talking about types of fundraising. So now that you have your budget, you're going to be able to make an argument for what you need in terms of the amount of money you're asking for and what you're going to use for it. Now you need to figure out how you're going to get that money. So I've come up with some of the typical ways that work for most organizations. And we're going to go a little bit in depth on each of these. What is direct mail versus partnerships and programs? And you might have some familiarity with this, but what we're going to do while we're going through this presentation is you're going to reopen that document we discussed previously. As a reminder, the document that we're talking about is your fundraising plan. If you haven't pulled that up, please go ahead and pause and go pull up that document and move on to the second page. The second page says tactics. I've included each of the types of fundraising as a tactic here on the left-hand side. In the middle column, we have the strengths. These are going to be your individual strengths. So as we go through and I say, this is what this type of fundraising does really well, you can say whether or not your organization has a strength that supports that type of fundraising. On the last column, I have weaknesses. So these are going to be things that maybe your organization isn't as great at doing. And that means not necessarily that you shouldn't do this type of fundraising, but as you go through, you might see that another type of fundraising is actually making use of your strengths a little bit more significantly. Let's start with direct mail. I think most of us are very familiar with this type of fundraising. You may have received a letter in the mail from an organization that you've previously donated to, or you might have received something that was completely unsolicited. I don't recommend sending a bunch of mail to people that you don't know, but there are ways to do that. You may have a really tight-knit community that's aware of your organization, but you don't have a really strong list of addresses. There are ways to work with the U.S. Postal Service to come up with a list of folks that would be potential donors, might be in certain zip codes, might be certain businesses. So definitely, if that's something that you think would work for you, you can look into doing some unsolicited mail. My strongest recommendation, though, is if you have a general older population of people who are invested and interested in your organization or what you're doing, direct mail is great, but definitely send it to people who are familiar with your organization. What you're going to do is receive a check back from those folks. So this can be a slightly expensive proposition because if you're asking folks to send in a check, you want them to have a way to send that back to you. So you'll probably include a self-addressed envelope. And maybe not all of those envelopes are going to return to you. So you really have to figure out if the cost is worth it based on the types of donors that you have. Again, if you have a really good connection with your community, this can be a great way to reach out to folks. The next type of fundraising we're going to talk about are events. Likely you've been invited to a number of fundraising events over the years and probably have seen one of the ones on this list. They're very popular. Even things like runs are also very popular. As someone who's not really athletic, I'm going to prefer something like a gala or an art exhibition. But you also have to think about your community. Is a walkathon going to be more popular than a silent auction? One thing that's incredibly popular in St. Louis is trivia nights. I worked in St. Louis for a long time. On any given night, there's a trivia night happening for philanthropy across the whole city and the county. You pay, they run trivia for you. You sometimes bring your own food and drinks. It's a really popular outing and does raise a ton of money for folks. But your community might not be familiar with that idea. They might think of it more as like pub trivia and not be used to making a donation for that. So you really have to think about what has been done in your community? What are people familiar with? What would people get excited about? Maybe something new and novel is the right way to go. There are a lot of websites that have things like 100 fundraising ideas. So you can absolutely look at some other events that have happened before. I'd like to show you just a few of the events that I've done. So I used to run an organization called Superheroines, etc. We did a geek trivia night. This was not in St. Louis, so it was kind of a mixed bag on the amount of people who turned out, but people seemed to really enjoy it. As you can see, these folks were very proud that they won the trivia. We called them the smartest in the room. And you can also see here that we did some pretty significant branding around the event. So we were, pushing this out there, making flyers and social media posts and all the stuff that kind of goes into it. So there's a little bit of work that goes into the event. Beyond just making sure that the night runs smoothly, there's a lot of pre-work that goes into it. And of course, I've got my pros and cons list for you. People really like to go to an event. That's something folks look forward to. You can oftentimes get a lot of people to come. And if it's an exciting enough event, newspapers, other media outlets might pick it up and share it. So you might get more visibility from the event than just the people who attend. Again, there's a lot of pre-work. There's a lot of work the day of. If you're doing something that's outdoors, you have to factor in the weather. There's so many times that I've planned events and something else is going on. So we used to corner the market on a Galentine's event because Superheroines, etc. We were women focused. We thought Galentine's Day was a great day. And now there are so many Galentine's Day events. It's become incredibly mainstream that we were competing against for-profit organizations that were using it and not getting the turnout that we would have liked. So definitely just think about what works for you. Online is pretty much everything now. So if you have a population that's maybe boomer and younger, you're going to want to pay attention because all of those folks are online. Online donations can be everything from having a donate button on your website to a social media fundraiser. So it can be really easy to get this set up. If you have a website, you can add a donation button. There are many, many platforms that allow you to integrate it straight into your website or work with an external party to set up those donations. People just really love doing things online now. It makes it so much easier if you already have your card out, if you're online shopping, to just go ahead and make a donation to another organization. You can also learn a lot about your donors this way because you can collect information about them a little bit more easily than having them fill out a form that goes back with their check. Maybe someone just wants to put a check in the mail. Some of the softwares can be really expensive to set up. Just kind of really depends on how much you want to manage. And honestly, especially if you're going to be doing email marketing where you're sending emails to people, you want to know who your donors or people who are interested in you are, because you want to send them targeted messaging. You want to have a big enough list to send out to know that you're going to get donations from that. On the other hand, email marketing, email fundraising is really king. That is where you're going to get the most donations. So definitely consider doing this. There are many, many tutorials on how to set this up, and consider what are your strengths and weaknesses in this area. Here's just one example of an online fundraiser. This is something we replicated in our email marketing, on our website, and in other social media platforms. What we did is we came up with a graphic that talked about what we are doing in order to raise money from folks. So you'll see behind the scenes before this, we came up with our budget, right? We knew how much we wanted to raise to support this particular program. We put this up on our website, and then you can see here's a link to the fundraiser. And we didn't link directly to our website. We did link to an external party that would process all of these fundraisers for us, and basically would just charge us a fee for the service. Anytime someone made a donation, there was a percentage that went toward paying for this fee. When I asked a room of people what they thought about fundraising, the first thing they thought about was cold calling. And that's not what this slide is about. I don't recommend that you simply find people's names online or in the white pages and start calling them up. That's not a really great way to solicit donations. However, for bigger donors, for people who are more invested in your organization, it is actually really helpful to call or do in person solicitations with them. And I know it can be really, really uncomfortable to have those conversations to ask people for money. But if people are already invested in your organization, calling them, talking to them, talking about your program, all the great things that you're doing, maybe sharing some of the results from a teen science cafe can be so much more effective than just sending them an email. I stole this idea from political fundraising, and I really think that it can work in nonprofit fundraising too. So, what you want to do is call folks and realize that you're really not going to get that high of a response rate, right? People might be eating dinner or out to a movie or doing stuff. Um, and, you're going to get a return eventually on that where they're going to make a donation, hopefully. So I think this is a great method. And, but if it's not something that you're comfortable with, it's not something that's a strength for you, then you just have to consider, what do you think is actually going to get the money raised for your organization, and what is the method that's going to get you there. The big thing with calling is that you need to make a plan ahead of time. You can't just start calling random people. Like you said, you don't want to call people, but you maybe don't want to call your neighbor if you don't think that they know anything about your organization yet. So you want to prioritize people who are going to have some sort of positive response, who knows your organization, who likes your organization, so possibly previous donors, volunteers. Maybe you've talked to your family for years and years and years about this program. Who are other people in the community who share similar beliefs? Are there other people who are invested in STEM education? Who's a potential to donate, even if they've never donated before? Who could possibly donate generally, but who's going to donate to you? You also want to make a script. You don't want to make it sound rehearsed, but you want to have your talking points ready just so that if someone asks a question, you know how to answer it. And like I said, I kind of stole this graphic and all this information from political fundraising. So you can replace this candidate here with potentially, organization or project or program. And as you go out from the center, these people are a little bit less likely to donate than the people closer to the center, right? So the people who know you and your organization, more likely to donate. People who also are interested in STEM, very likely to donate. Axe to grind, this is a little bit, more political, they're upset about something. But there might be people in your community who, tired of not having enough science classes at school, right? So got to consider what all of these folks are thinking about in terms of why they would want to donate. I lumped crowdfunding and peer-to-peer together because they have a lot of things in common with each other. Um, you're going to be asking people for smaller donations, more like $5 to $25. It's always nice when someone gives $100. With crowdfunding, it's you sort of as the organization sharing it out there. With peer-to-peer, you're also asking people in your network, whether that's volunteers or other people who work for the organization, to set up these like personal fundraising pages where they solicit donations. A lot of races and walkathons use this platform. There might be people who engage who aren't already familiar with your organization. Like a lot of people like to do races, even if they have never participated in anything else related to that organization. You're going to use some existing donor bases with this. You're going to leverage those smaller donations. So people who maybe can't always give a whole ton of money, but are really happy to give you about $15. A lot of people giving $15 is great. That can sometimes even be better than someone giving a big lump sum. because then you've built a donor base that might donate over and over again. Again, you're going to encounter some of those fees. If you don't already have a large audience, you may not be able to raise as much money that way. You also do have to send updates throughout these campaigns. So with crowdfunding, you send out these, we've hit this goal, or we're only 5% away from being finished. And that can be really taxing on the person if there's a lot of updates going on throughout one day. Another method to consider is partnerships and sponsorships. You might see this a lot in your community already. People who own a business want to sponsor a kid's T-ball group, or the Rotary Club is sponsoring a run locally. So there's definitely opportunities here to engage quote unquote corporate sponsorships, or at least business sponsorships. I know corporate makes it sound really big and scary, but essentially you're just asking local businesses to make a more significant donation than perhaps an individual would be able to make. And really they're likely going to ask for you is logos to market what they've been doing in terms of their sponsorship. There's a lot of websites that can give you information on perks and things that you can offer for corporate sponsorships. And maybe you give all their employees a sticker for the Teen Science Cafe, or you post once a month on social media about them to let folks know that they're a sponsor. So that is kind of some of the cons in terms of this thing, is that yes, you're going to get the money, but you do have to really manage a relationship with them, and perhaps give some perks in response to that. But it's likely that a local pizza shop might want to sponsor you, and you can keep it pretty low key. The final and maybe biggest one is grants. Grants can bring in a lot of money depending on what level of grant you're seeking, whether it's a family foundation or a governmental grant. The thing about grants is that they are often restricted, meaning you can only spend what you've budgeted for. On the other hand, getting grants from certain organizations brings prestige. It can bring a good amount of money and help you feel a little bit more stable with your programming. Grant writing skills are not impossible to learn, but they do take some time. And if you wanted to hire someone, there would be a cost associated with that. A lot of times you're going to have to do pretty significant reporting for grants, letting people know what you actually accomplished with that money. But overall, I think it can be worth it to go after grants, especially if they're local and are very invested in the type of work that you're doing. Thanks again for watching. I hope that you found this presentation on fundraisers to be helpful for you and what you're doing with your Teen Science Cafe. If you have any more questions, you can visit teensciencecafe.org to find more tips on fundraising and learn more about the Teen Science Cafe program.